Let's put in my video as well. Great, we're live on YouTube now, and we're ready to begin the session.
Okay, so should we just start now, or should we give?
I'll just do a brief introduction, then I'll hand over to you, Professor Gooptu. So welcome back. Welcome back to our next session. We're delighted to host paper presentations on education in South Asia from around the world at the conference today. The theme of this session in this room is Inequalities and the State, and the presentations will be chaired by Professor Nandini Gooptu, Associate Professor of South Asian Studies, University of Oxford. Each panelist will share their presentation with us for 10 minutes, followed by 5 minutes of audience questions and answers. Please feel free to put in your questions in the chat box here, or if you're watching us on YouTube, please feel free to put in your questions in the live chat box. So I really hope to hear all of your questions, and I'm really looking forward to the presentations. Professor Gooptu, I hand over to you now to chair the session, and thank you so much for doing this.
Okay, thank you very much. So we should have a very rich and exciting session, and since time is of the essence, let's start straight away with Nida Khan, who's from the National Institute of Educational Planning and Administration in Delhi. And her paper is entitled Pandemic and Kashmir Conflict, a Pernicious Combination for Students in the Kashmir Valley. So over to you, Nida.
Could you unmute yourself, Nida?
Okay. A very good afternoon to everybody. For me, it's 4:30, and for you, it's 12 o'clock, I suppose. So let me begin by sharing my screen first. I suppose it's visible now. So my topic for the conference is Pandemic and Kashmir Conflict, a pernicious combination for students in the Kashmir Valley. To begin with, I just wanted to say it is a part of my PhD work. Earlier, I started my work in 2018, and I was working on how Kashmiri identity affects their educational experiences because they come from a conflict area. But then when I was doing my pilot study in 2019, July and August, the pandemic, then there was abrogation of Article 370, and then the pandemic came in. So I have tried to include these other aspects like pandemic and the abrogation of Article 370 into my research work later on. So to begin with, I just want to say that how education is seen as a tool of human development. So it's just like a mirror, it reflects the everyday realities of society. So through my research, I have tried to show how the Kashmiri students coming from a conflict zone, how their everyday reality, especially in the context of education, is affected. Researchers various reports have stated how there are 1.3 billion learners across the world who are not able to attend school or universities, and approximately 320 million learners in India especially were not able to attend schools. So now to go further, there's some problem with my screen sharing. Okay. So now as I'm talking about Kashmir, first of all, we need to see when we are talking about the J&K state earlier before 2019, it is divided into 3 regions, Jammu, Kashmir Valley and the Ladakh region. So now my focus is only on the Kashmir Valley region. Now we can see how Kashmir is a part of the 29 sub-national conflicts in South Asia. It is the most militarized zone in the world to the extent that there is presence of 1 security personnel for every 6 civilians. And the home outside boundary is totally being rendered indistinct, as in the military presence is present everywhere, be it home, be it university campuses, markets, recreational spaces, they're present everywhere. So looking at the conflict that has happened, a Kashmir mental health survey was done in 2015, which states that every adult in the region have experienced 7.7 traumatic events in their lifetime. As we can see, the data from that research shows how there's a large portion of people who are suffering from depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorders. And a very interesting thing that is existing in the Kashmir Valley is the internet bans or the e-curfews, as they say it. the data that I have highlighted here, we can see how from 2012 to 2021, there have been series of internet bannings in the area, to the extent like from 2019 August to around Feb 2021, around more than 18 months, like 555 days of internet ban was experienced in the region. Also, when we are talking about Kashmiri students per se, we need to first of all highlight how there is a majority of people born in 1990s, to the extent for them, conflict is the new normal. Because since 1990s to 2000 at present, they have seen series of conflicts in the region, which has adversely affected them mentally, physically, sociologically, in their educational sphere as well. So there are various people who have highlighted how there is a generational shift that has happened. Like as my PPT is showing that they were, in the first generation, people had faith in leadership. But over time, there have been researches which have stated that how the educated youth is joining militancy over time. So for my theoretical concept, I'm looking at the social identity theory, which says a person's sense of who they are is based upon their group membership. There's always a conflicting relationship between the in-group and out-group. And as I'm trying to look at the everyday experiences of students in Kashmir Valley, so I've used the social ecological approach, which tries to understand the micro and micro perspective of the students in their everyday life. Methodological approach, I am focusing on Kashmiri youth per se in the age group of 15 to 29 years of age. And a mixed method approach was adopted for this study. First of all, pilot study was done in 2019. But over time, when I was in the field itself, then then the Article 370 was abolished, and there was a series of lockdowns and curfews in the region. So I had to just somehow return back over here. So in this process, I had developed some contacts in the region. And now during pandemic, I am trying to get hold of the data through telephonic interviews. Various online methods have been adopted. And a part of research has been done through primary data, and it is a research in process as of now. And so now if we look at Kashmir students, the major problems that they're facing, as per we can see that there's prolonged conflict. Almost 3 decades of conflict have been seen in the region. Their everyday life is disturbed with presence of such a lot of military and turmoil that is happening in the region, which has mentally affected these students and Kashmiri people in particular. The education system has been adversely affected. There is a series of lockdowns, curfews, and internet bans in the region. And now the new thing that has come up is the pandemic. So if we categorize this into C, we can say the problems faced at the school level and at the higher education level are very different. Like as we can see in 2016, the insurgency cases increased a lot. And schools were very much targeted at that point of time. Around 25 schools were set ablaze at that time. Many students who were protesting had also been booked under Public Safety Act. Children were missing their classes because of the curfews. And in order to handle these situations, the government came up with new ideas like mass promotion, 50% relaxation in syllabus of exams. Exams were conducted, but the results were delayed, which were affecting them a lot. So within the conflict, they were trying to come up with new innovative ideas like mass promotion, 50% exam relaxation, which in case of pandemic we see, which has been followed in other states of India particularly. And this conflict has also reduced the number of working hours, working days in the education institution. To say like there were only 19 working days from August 2020 to November 2021. We can see how this is creating a problem in the region. With the abrogation of Article 370, the J&K state was divided into 2 union territories, Jammu and Kashmir Union Territory and Ladakh Union Territory. And interestingly, the internet ban was there, even though when it was allowed to have internet, only 2G speed internet was available. To the extent, if you have to watch a video of 10 to 15 minutes, it takes 45 minutes to download for the students, and also there is continuous buffering. So the issue of online education, which the world is talking about, becomes very much problematic in case of Kashmir Valley. As I have already stated, various other reasons. One interesting thing to be looked at in case of Kashmir is that they have a very different academic calendar which has been followed. Like for them, from December 21 to March first week, they have winter vacation because of the harsh weather condition. So now from 2019, August 2019, after abdication of Article 370, there were lockdowns and curfews in the region. Then the winter vacation happened. Immediately when in March, the schools were open, then the pandemic lockdown was happened. So we can see how more than 1.5 years, students were not able to attend educational institutions per se. And
2 minutes left.
Higher education institution, we can see in the higher education institutions, children are facing various problems. Like, interestingly, in the research, it was highlighted how the annual academic subscription had expired, with the institutions had offered, even though they gave leverage of 6 months, but the pandemic happened. So they were not able to take part in conferences, deadlines were missed for paper publication. And also, interesting thing came up was with the funding and scholarship were not regularly received because the administration was not able to update the documents on time. Children with disability were facing another level of problems that existed. So some innovative strategies have been adopted, like learning material support system were adopted came up into picture, where teachers and students have the individual account where they could upload their documents and students could download as per their need. But with the internet non-existence, things were becoming problematic. There were tele classes happened, radio classes were also happening. There was various innovative techniques that have been happened, as stated by the Indian Digital Report 2020. But the reality says something different. No internet, no educational facility available. People had come up with new ideas like community schoolings. Then there was another interesting thing, the Internet Express. Like, people from Srinagar had to go to Jammu region in order to avail internet facilities. Students were not able to fill up entrance examination forms. One of the teachers during the field stated how he was facing difficulty in teaching class 8 students chemistry through audio mode. So he says, imagine the status that we as teachers are struggling in teaching students. So the question arises, with so many innovative education policies already in place, as I stated, mass promotion and other things which are being followed in different states, then why it's that online education is still a major failure in the region? Probably
time up, sorry. So can you wrap it up in just 1 or 2 seconds? Otherwise we'll eat into the time of the other speakers.
Okay. So just, there are various issues which I have highlighted. So the probable solutions can be, we can think of restructuring the education system and focus on blended learning, online or offline mode. Adequate IT infrastructure should be provided. Teachers and students should be properly trained. And as we can see, there are various mental health facility issues that people are facing there. There should be proper counseling facilities available for Kashmiri people, and particularly school educational institutions, so that they can avail these facilities properly. And when we are talking about policies regarding Kashmiri people, one thing is to talk about Kashmiri people, but the other thing is to talk to these people. So when we are trying to make any policy, we should make sure that these stakeholders are part in the policy making process, so the ground realities can be understood. So I just want to end by saying this, as Paul Freire has said, that unequal social relationships lead to culture of silence. So the question that comes to my mind while doing this research was that, is the culture of silence that has been in the context of Kashmir, we say, is it derogatory? Is it deliberate? Or is it forcefully put on these people by forcing internet ban, lockdown, curfews? So we need to understand that how far the problem may be, having a proper dialogue and including the stakeholders and trying to understand the realities from the ground will make a better picture in understanding the problems of the people in the region who are facing various problems like pandemic, conflict, and the abdication of 370, which have very much affected their education and life per se. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and sorry to rush you, but we have so little time for everyone. So questions, please, if you would like to raise your hands and ask your question. Anybody? Okay, perhaps perhaps I can start with a question myself. So on the note that you ended, you make the point that people are capable of, I think you said something like people are capable of critical thinking and dialogically in conversation with other people. And with the absence or slowness or censorship of the internet, one of the main modes of that dialogic critical encounter is absent. And I was wondering how you think that might be made possible through other modes of contact.
Like at the ground level, few things have been followed. Like in that case, teachers have been affected a lot. Like they have started the learning portal for students and teachers where they can have individual accounts. But with internet bans, they're not able to download. So some move to other states like Jammu or other places to get the internet access. So now what the teachers who are doing, they actually take the printout of these assignments on their own expenses and go to their houses and give them online assignments or the reading material. So that is more of an individual effort. Like in case of community schools, it's the educated youth, or you can say teachers, who are voluntarily taking up these community schools in open areas outside educational institutions. But that also becomes nullified when in case of pandemic, you are not allowed to have any gathering. So the problem has aggravated with this pandemic. There were existing issues, inequalities were there, but the internet lockdown, when you are saying everybody is equal, online education is so good, and the government report of 2020 says everything is there, but the ground reality seems to be very problematic as such.
Okay, thank you for that. There's a question here from Sheila Jant. At village level, is any, and in quotes, primitive method being used for making children literate? Are children being taught any traditional skills?
Particularly, I am just focusing on urban areas. I'm mainly focusing in Srinagar areas. So rural areas, I might not be able to give a very clear picture, but yeah, community schools is existing in urban areas and rural areas as well. And there the source of education for people are that the educated sections of the society, be it who are studying in different states or within the valley itself, they are trying to disseminate knowledge to the younger kids or others. So as such, government efforts, things are really missing that, and in that aspect.
Okay. Does anybody have a question? Please feel free to raise your hand if you like. There doesn't seem to be any other questions, so perhaps we can move on to the next speaker, and we're still just on time. So the next speaker is Mohammad Tahir Ganie, who's an independent researcher. And the title of the paper is How Are Government Primary Schools and Students Coping with the Pandemic Lockdown in Kashmir? So over to you.
Thank you so much for having me and giving this opportunity to talk about the problems with the primary school education in Kashmir. So let me share, sorry. Okay, so I'm looking at the primary schools, how they are coping with the pandemic in Kashmir. Some of the things have been already covered by Nida, and I agree with a lot of things, like how things are not that good at the ground level, and we need to do a lot there to improve things. So a context of my research is what I call as triple lockdown and Kashmir Valley. First was when there was this revocation of following which the government of India imposed a military lockdown for many weeks. Then the second lockdown happened in 2020. It was related to the COVID-19 pandemic. And the third lockdown happened in 2021, this year, during what is called as the second wave of coronavirus. So I'm getting a message that there is some disturbance in my internet connection. It's better now, okay. All right, so there is this context of triple lockdown, which has actually affected the education of Kashmiri children. Nearly 2 million kids missed their formal schooling for nearly 2 years when we count the number of days that that were gone during these 3 lockdowns. According to the BBC News report, which was published recently last month, students from more than 150 villages could not access online lessons when when the classes were conducted online. So, but there were still many students who could not afford or who could not access education online because of internet connection and lack of smartphones and all other things. So 4G high-speed internet was restored in February 2021 this year after 550 days of ban. So this is the context in which we are talking about the primary education in Kashmir. Schools were ordered to be opened this year in March, but they had to be closed soon after on 4th of April. So you can see things were coming back to normalcy, but then this second wave of corona happened. So this unique context of triple lockdown has badly affected the education of students, particularly from the economically weaker sections of Kashmiri society. So prolonged disruption and school closures during the years of primary education is especially concerning as students lose out on developing basic cognitive skills. Moreover, in the specific context of Kashmir, which is a site of a protracted armed conflict, prolonged disruption of studies of children could potentially add to the dynamics that has bearing on mental health of Kashmiri children and in turn on the political situation in the region. According to Amit Sen, who is a child and adolescent psychiatrist and has published on, has done research on Kashmir, he visited Kashmir during the 2019 military lockdown, and he later published an article in Express where he said that what he saw in the Kashmiri children when he visited Kashmir with a team of fact-finding team. So he talked about how they shared experiences of paralyzing fear, acute anxiety, panic attacks, depressive, dissociative symptoms, post-traumatic symptoms, suicidal tendencies, and severe anger outbursts. And what he was saying at the end of the article was that there are these apprehensions among the psychologists, psychiatrists, that the trauma which has, which the Kashmiri children have suffered will, manifest in different forms in coming months and, years. Sen also argues that repetitive and violent trauma in endemic war zones can be deeply damaging for the community, especially children and adolescents who could be scared for life and pass on their fear and anger to generations that follow. And they don't need to be tutored or indoctrinated to form extreme attitudes and prejudices. So in that sense, when we look at this closure of schools and disengagement from educational processes, it has a bearing on political situation in Kashmir or the mental health of the kids. According to Dr. Majid Shafi, who is a clinical psychiatrist based in Srinagar, he said, and I quote, "Almost every parent of kids and teenagers in Kashmir is complaining these days about increased behavioral issues in their kids." And his assessment is that there is an increase of symptoms such as a feeling of hopelessness, anxiety, mood disorders, and a decline in academic performance. So my presentation looks at what are the main constraints in accessing education during the lockdown for government schools in Kashmir, and how are government schools responding to the pandemic crisis in comparison to the private schools, and what interventions have been made by the government, and what are the things that are lacking or are needed urgently. The sample of my research are 2 tehsils within the district Pulwama. I'm looking at the schools which are located in Pampur Tehsil and Avantipora Tehsil. Pampur has 44 primary schools and Avantipora has 51 government primary schools. As far as the socio-economic background of government primary school students is concerned, they generally are from weaker socio-economic backgrounds, labor class, auto rickshaw drivers, agricultural laborers, slum dwellers, tribal and below poverty line families. About 90% of children belong to the BPL category, including tribal and other backward categories. I just want to qualify, and I just wanted to say that this presentation is only a preliminary report based on research taken in a short span of time. So its findings need to be confirmed in a larger population. As far as private schools are concerned in these two tehsils, the students of these schools usually come from middle and high income families. And as I told you, the students in government schools come from economically weaker sections. While government schools started online teaching around the same time as the private schools did, but they were not as successful as private schools. And the main reason was lack of parental guidance, lack of smartphones, and poor internet connectivity, because rural areas have patchy internet in Kashmir. So Directorate of School Education Kashmir started on what is called as community classes. These are open air classes where students are kept at 2-meter distance. These are usually taken in the grounds of the schools, or the in the grounds which are closer to the schools. So as far as community classes are concerned, they have been somewhat successful, as I could understand from the interviews which I conducted with the teachers from these two tehsils. A visual representation of a community school will be like this. Although here you can see there are chairs for these kids or these students, but in government schools they usually sit on the grass or on the ground. So, but it would look something like this. According to India Bloom's new service, which was recently published, by July 15, 2021, 180,000 students from government schools attended community classes ever since they were started. And also 6,000, nearly 6,000 private school students also participated in these community classes. In Pulwama district, which is a focus of my research, around 20,000 students have availed the facility at 487 different locations. But school education department treats these community classes as a parallel hybrid learning exercise to supplement the existing learning management system. Learning and management system is the online mode which they have at their disposal. But as far as I could understand through the interviews with the teachers from these two tehsils, community classes have actually replaced the online mode of teaching. Effectively, it has replaced the online mode of teaching. The official circular, which was released regarding the community schools, said, and I quote, "The community schools should be prioritized for those children who are not connected through online classes and should in no way be considered as an alternative to online classes. Online classes should continue for the connected children through learning management system or real-time video conferencing apps or conference calls and other digital platforms." So as you can see in the circular, their focus or their priority is online learning, or they prefer online learning to community classes. However, as I told you earlier, community classes have replaced online mode of teaching, at least in these two tehsils, because community classes are relatively more effective according to the teachers. What community?
Time is over. Sorry, your time is over. So if you could wrap up in a couple of seconds, please.
All right. When I was interviewing a zonal education officer of Pampur, he said that internet facilities were not available, Android phones were not available with the children. So during the lockdown period, online teaching was not that successful. However, he said that community teaching was of great support. But although community teaching is successful, but there are still problems which persist. Like there is lack of space. Schools do not have their own grounds. They are renting the grounds, or they are renting the orchards where they are teaching the kids. Most schools have just 3 or 4 rooms. They lack toilets, and some schools are partitioning their rooms. Like they have 1 or 2 rooms and they're partitioning and taking different classes in there. And a couple of teachers told me that cooperation from students is mixed. Some students attend and some do not attend regularly and all that. Only some parents are cooperating. Most do not actively involve themselves in their kids' education because they are from the labor class, or they are busy in their earning and all that. And community class happens from 8 to 10 because weather is hot, so they try to keep it in the mornings. But 2 hours is not sufficient to cover all the different 5 subjects which are to be taught. Teachers told me that they can give lessons, but they cannot check the homework, or they cannot do other activities. And also another problem is that many government school teachers are on non-academic duties, like they are for the surveillance team related to COVID pandemic crisis. So the school department is actually cooperating with the health department in managing the COVID pandemic, and a lot of schools have been converted into these what you call them, quarantine centers and all that stuff. So those are some of the problems. A government school teacher from Avantipura told me that it is just a compensatory thing to keep students somehow engaged. This was regarding the community classes. Another teacher from Pampur told
there
me
are some
that,
questions. You can either carry on or take some of the questions.
all right, okay. I think I will, because time is running out, so I will take some of the questions. I wonder whether policymakers are thinking in terms of mainstreaming community education, outdoor learning based on its success during the pandemic. I think informally they are doing it. The schools have the autonomy in a way that they conduct these classes. But as far as the circular or any government order is concerned, I haven't seen that yet. And there is also, I think, there is this direction from the central government of creating bridge courses, and every state, every union territory is supposed to come up with their own roadmap or come up with their own bridge, own document regarding that. But I haven't seen any such document from the Kashmir Union Territory so far.
And there's another question in the chat box. What about assessment? How much has the syllabus been diluted?
I think what teachers told me was that they are able to teach them basic things, they are not able to cover a lot of stuff. So they just give them lessons which are there in the textbooks, and that is it. They don't do any assessments or anything like that.
Actually, if I can add a question to that, I mean, how much of the teaching and learning was being done online before the pandemic? We've all now got used to online work, but how much of that was actually done before the pandemic? And you mentioned towards the beginning the major problem of mental health issues. And if that is a key problem due to the political situation rather than the pandemic, then how would the online environment solve that problem? So there seems to be two separate problems here. One is the trauma caused by the political situation, and the other is the pandemic and lack of access to the internet. And the latter is a conjunctural problem during the pandemic, but it cannot solve the other problem, can it?
No, it cannot. The political problem is separate, obviously, but it has added to the dynamics, which I was saying earlier. Because due to the political situation, there is already this lack of hopelessness, anxieties, and mental health related issues. So what the pandemic has done has actually exacerbated these mental health issues in kids. And why I'm actually focusing on the primary education is because students of higher secondary schools, this is what I think, have already acquired basic skills, basic cognitive skills, so they can somehow manage. But primary school students are actually learning the basics, and this closure of schools takes away crucial years of basic learning from them. And there is also this problem of mass promotion, which has been happening since last 2 consecutive years. So schools have been informally asked not to fail their students. So a student who was in grade 3 in 2019 was promoted to grade 4 in 2020 and will be most probably promoted to grade 5 in 2021. But this student hasn't covered the entire syllabus of the previous 2 grades. So it will be a very difficult situation for that student. Because they have not covered the entire syllabus of the previous 2 classes. They cannot be expected to have the required prior training skills to be able to read or adequately understand the syllabus and texts of the classes they have not progressed to in a normal way.
Yeah. Okay, but if you could perhaps answer the final question very quickly, and then we'll move on to the next speaker. Are the syllabi curtailed or modified keeping the pandemic in mind?
Yes, I talked to the teachers and they said that they have curtailed the syllabus and they have made it minimal. Like they have made it to the, they have made it minimal in the sense that they want to cover the basics. Actually, they cannot do the normal like they used to do in 2018 or before 2019.
Thank you very much for that. And sorry to again rush you. So if we could move on to the next speaker, that's Dalsie Gangmei, who's also at the National Institute of Educational Planning and Administration. And the title of her paper is Inching Further from the Promise of Access. So over to you, Dalsie.
Okay. Good afternoon and good evening. Today, I would like to briefly discuss on the relationship between access and digital divide in India in the pandemic, and explore some of the critical challenges associated with addressing the problem from the experience of tribal children in remote Tamenglong District of Manipur. Access to education to all learners has been a central or critical tenet of all official promotions of the various initiatives and programs, such as digitalizing textbook, developing e-teacher training, e-class lecture video, and so forth, which are widely shared in various websites, mobile apps, social media, radio, TVs, and so forth. So these offer a promise, a promise that with the right tools and skills, e-learning platform is a space of unlimited opportunity where any learner could learn. But a growing number of literature has highlighted the need to critically assess this insistence on e-learning education in India. Let's do a fact check. So despite launching Digital India in 2025 to connect rural areas with high-speed internet networks and improving digital literacy, internet infrastructure in India is far from ready to support this shift to e-learning. And 55,000 villages in India have no access to mobile network coverage. 58% of urban households and 85.1% of rural households in India have no access to internet. And the coverage of internet and IT penetration in Northeast is even worse. Being low in prospective customer base, telecom service providers are reluctant to invest in these remote areas of the northeastern states. And if you look at Tamenglong District, which is also considered as one of the most backward districts in the country by the Ministry of Panchayati Raj, it is quite a common sight to see people catching network even in odd places. And the average download speed ranges from 0 to 1 Mbps. And being the rainiest hill district in Manipur, heavy rain often causes landslides. So landslides or strong wind, overgrown tree tops, especially bamboo trees, often disrupt the power supply. So these frequent power cuts impact the running of cellular towers as well, but compounded that by bad road and transportation, malfunctions in any of those are difficult to fix in rainy days, as reported by the concerned department officials. And due to law and order situation in Manipur, it has experienced more than 5 internet shutdowns since 2015, even during the pandemic. So such disparities across the country are directly replicated in schools as well as social groups. And a report was found that 20% in Manipur get some type of e-learning in the pandemic. And this is a very recent picture of power supply being disrupted by a bamboo tree in Tamenglong. The picture on the right is a rainy season road in Tamenglong. And the picture on the left is actually taken from Assam, but this is what we call catching network. So this pandemic has also exposed where one goes to school matters as much, if not more than if one goes to school at all. So most of the government primary school in the district are non-functional since the first nationwide lockdown in March 2020. And as per the UDICE district report card, 60.8% learners are enrolled in government primary school. So this district has the highest number of enrollment in government school in the state. And a sizable number of learners in the district headquarters come from remote villages attending these government schools. So in the event of lockdown, many were forced to move back to their villages, and remote villages in the district have no access to public transport facilities. So this is one of the reasons why e-learning is not possible, as many learners are unreachable digitally and physically after they move back to their village, as stated by school teachers and school headmasters. And even before the pandemic, dropout rate is already high in the district in government school. And as per UDICE district report is concerned, this district has the highest rate of dropout in class 5 with 37.9%. So this pandemic poses double threat to these learners attending the government school. And a total number of students admitted in new academic in one government primary school is reduced by 90% as compared with the previous academic year. Access to e-learning is not merely in terms of digital haves and have-nots, as Boyd argued, but it is also within the hierarchy of access among those that do. For instance, access to smartphone does not guarantee a connection to the internet any more than access to the internet is not a guarantee of effective internet services. And in addition, variation in skills and experiences result in another form of digital divide. According to one private school teacher in the district, merely 25% learners are benefiting from the e-learning in her class, and the remaining 75% of the learners have no access to smartphones, and some they share phones with their sibling, parents, neighbors, or relatives. So these phone sharers often collide their classes with the other siblings' classes or work with their parents or neighbors. And schoolwork in lower classes in most of these private schools in the district are conducted mostly in WhatsApp. So they click picture and send it to the teachers in an allotted time. But learners who have no access to smartphones actually go to the school to collect or submit assignments, even during the pandemic. And few learners who are residing in far-flung villages but attending private school in the headquarters, they posted their assignments in vehicles. So the concerned teachers actually collect the assignments usually from the driver. Power cut and bad network connectivity, along with unaccustomed to the medium, make e-learning difficult, not just for the learners, but also for the teachers and parents. As one private school teacher explained, and I quote, "I have not been able to access the link the school has provided for e-teaching training for months because of the abysmal internet connectivity in the district. And those few lucky teachers who managed to access the link were constantly disrupted by buffering and poor quality video. And private tutoring jumps during this pandemic, and the fees would range between rupees 600 to 3,000 rupees per person per month. So in this pandemic, burden of education is now shifted to individuals paying for technological devices or phone bills or private tutoring, so access to which is also differentiated again. As one parent narrated, and I quote, "My cousin who lives in Delhi helped me buy my phone from her credit card for equated monthly installment, as I can't pay the full amount at one go. So this phone is being shared with her 6-year-old daughter for e-learning." And out of desperation, few schools in the district have reopened, defying the government restrictions and order. Just recently, in one private school, maximum numbers of students and teachers were tested COVID-19 positive. And this is the picture of the school. So this shift to e-learning, in fact, appears to act as a filter in assessing future opportunities. So it is reported that some youth from the pandemic have been recruited by the militant groups in northeastern region. And young learners eloping is on the rise in the pandemic in the district. And some of this, which I would like to call digital refugees from these remote villages attending government schools, are already segmented into domestic help worker in the district headquarters. So this kind of situation would only exacerbate cynicism, discontentment, economic deprivation, political division, social division, which could eventually lead to social conflict, especially in a volatile region like the Northeast. And so the insistence on
2 minutes, yeah.
Okay. The insistence on e-learning in India negates this unequal distribution of resources across the country, which present this inaccurate image of learners as uniformly prepared for the digital world, while ignoring this unequal level of privilege which is required to such access. But such problem in India is often addressed in more of a hopeful terms as a mere digital divide, a divide which could be resolved by sending resources to this digital have-nots. So in such framing, access to education becomes a matter of getting the right tools and right skills, which completely obscure the structural problems of social, economic, political, and regional dislocation and make it like individual deficiencies of tools and skills. So technology does help, but it will not eliminate all of the issues relating to access to education. In fact, it mirrors this social divisions, which is already pre-existed. And this makes it even more visible during this pandemic. And as Boyd argues, the more we rely on techno solution, the more we define second-class citizenship. And as Green posited, it is easiest to recommend and provide prescriptions, but it is even more important to recognize the specific political condition imposing specific structural restraint that makes certain policies and practices more or less desirable. So to conclude, this paper has argued for caution in proceeding with this trend and not to lose sight of this fundamental issue of inequality and disempowerment that technology may not be capable of addressing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a wonderfully well timed and also very, very interesting paper that raises some very fundamental questions and draws attention to very important structural issues. For questions then, please, if you would like to raise your hands or put it in the chat box. We have some time, so if you want to ask your questions directly, that will be good. Okay, perhaps while people are collecting their thoughts, if I could start off by asking a question, which is to do with the fundamental issue that you were raising, that while the pandemic has drawn attention to the deep inequalities in access to education through a digital mode, even without the pandemic, is it then a good idea to rely so much on digital modes of learning? Should we, in fact, not promote that as the ultimate solution to imparting proper education to all?
Without expanding this digital infrastructure that could reduce, social and geographical disparities, I don't think that would be a good way to go about. Without giving the tools and the skills, how would you expect, for these students to have an access to education? So it is a long way to go, especially for this region, to have an online mode. And like I said, even with the private school students, they are barely hanging and upholding the institution. So everything is done by WhatsApp. So you can imagine if they have an exams, they have to write down in their notebooks, take a picture and send it to their teachers in an allotted time. And so some would actually have to go to the school to conduct the examinations even during the pandemic, which means risking their lives. So I don't think this is in a way, ready for this online mode yet, at least for this region.
Yes, thank you. That's a very important salutary point. So there's a question here. Is there any community initiative by youth bodies as such without relying on digital mode?
Not that I came across, but community is helping in the sense when there is a power cut, people flock into those neighbors who have generator to recharge your phone, to charge your phone. So that is something, and they are, generously providing that. And also, private schools at least are providing study materials for those students who do not have an access to smartphones. So government schools in that sense could actually initiate that, at least for their upper primary schools, if not for the primary classes.
Well, thank you very much indeed for that very interesting paper. And if I could now move on to the next speaker, we're already running 10 minutes late. So the next speaker is Mohammad Hossain from East West University in Bangladesh. And the title of the paper is Right to Education of the Rohingya Refugee Children Living in Bangladesh, Rethinking Through the Lessons Learned from COVID-19. Okay, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Professor Gooptu. Am I visible and audible?
Yes, both.
All right, thank you. First of all, I'm sorry for the trouble. There was a power cut in my place, so thank you for your consideration. Now, moving on to the presentation. As you can see, the title of my paper is Right to Education of the Rohingya Refugee Children Living in Bangladesh, Rethinking Through the Lessons Learned from COVID-19. In case of the Rohingya refugee children, right to education is a problem even during normal time, but COVID-19 has added the challenges. So I will try to cover both the aspects, the right to education as a challenge for the Rohingya refugees who are living in Bangladesh, and the added challenges due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Starting with the background information, as we know that there has been frequent military operations against the Rohingya people in the Rakhine state of Myanmar, and that resulted in the huge influx of the Rohingya refugees from Myanmar to Bangladesh from 25th August 2017. And the present crisis is considered as one of the a major crisis of the world. And right now in Bangladesh, in the Rohingya refugee camps in the Cox's Bazar region of Bangladesh, more than 1 million Rohingya people are living. So there has been different talks going on that the Rohingya children are going to be the lost generation because they are not getting proper education. And the Bangladesh government, as a whole state, has some obligations. UNHCR has some obligations. So there are different issues going on in relation to the right to education of the Rohingya refugee children. So I'll be trying to cover these aspects in my paper. Now, I'll give you a brief introduction about right to education as a human right. As we know that the UDH, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly in 1948. And based on the UDH, there have been a theory called Three Generations Theory of Human Rights. And according to this theory, the right to education as a human right is placed in the second generation rights. Now, about the refugees, the 1951 Refugee Convention includes some rights. For example, access to the courts, to primary education, to work, and the provision for documentation, including refugee travel document in passport form. This convention and its protocol of 1967 stated that there shall be no discrimination based on race, religion, or country of origin. So it appears that the right to education, at least primary education for refugee children, is in consideration within the international refugee protection regime. This implication actually generates the UNHCR's obligation to provide the right to education to the Rohingya refugee children. So moving on to the obligation of the UNHCR. The UNHCR actually execute its mandate to provide international protection to the refugees under the 1951 Refugee Convention and its protocol of 1967. And Article 22 of this convention deals with the right to education for refugees. Accordingly, in the context of this convention and the international human rights instrument, the UNHCR advocates for education as a fundamental right. In addition to that, the UNHCR's 2002 agenda for protection focused on the right to education as a tool for the protection of the rights of the refugees, is one of the agendas which promotes education for the refugee children. Besides, its Education for All program involves 6 specific goals to protect and promote education for the refugees. And the goals are namely a free access to primary education, equitable access to appropriate learning for youth and adults, adult literacy, gender equity, and quality education. Therefore, in my study, I have tried to explore that the UNHCR should ensure the right to education to the refugee children under not only the 1951 Refugee Convention, but also other international instruments. I'll be just briefly talking about the other international instruments, as you can see in the slide. For example, the 1979 CEDAW, which requires that there shall be no discrimination in provisions relating to education for men and women. Again, regardless of the status of the children, Article 28 of the 1989 CRC, Convention on the Rights of the Children, it also guarantees the right to education to all the children. Moreover, if I just focus on 2 resolutions of the General Assembly, the right to education for refugee children has been well articulated in both the resolutions of the United Nations General Assembly in 2010. The resolution of the Human Rights Council of the UN General Assembly on the right to education in emergencies, and the resolution on the right to education for the refugees, migrants, and asylum seekers highlight that the right to education is inevitable, and therefore even emergencies should not preclude this right. So in case of the Rohingya refugee children, in my study, I've tried to explain as to why UNHCR has obligation to provide education to the Rohingya refugee children and how they can provide education to the Rohingya refugee children in the periods when there is no pandemic and even during this COVID-19 pandemic. Now, moving on to the obligation of Bangladesh as a host state. Since my study is confined within the Rohingya refugee children in Bangladesh, so I'll be just highlighting the obligation of Bangladesh as a host state, because it is hosting the highest number of refugees in the Cox's Bazar region. So in case of Bangladesh as a host state, I should first mention that, like many other states in Asia, Bangladesh is neither party to the 1951 Refugee Convention and its protocol of 1967. Nor does it have any formal domestic law that deals with the refugees. In practice, we can see that Bangladesh treats them under the old laws. The refugees in Bangladesh are entitled to get protection as non-citizens under the Constitution of Bangladesh. So there are some laws and the Constitution of Bangladesh which are dealing with the refugees. And the refugees are being considered as foreigners in Bangladesh, and they have some constitutional rights as non-citizens. In addition to that, the Constitution of Bangladesh has one provision to ensure education to the people of its own territory. However, the problem is that the right to education, which is guaranteed to the people of Bangladesh, the citizens of Bangladesh, is not a right for which people can go to court to enforce the right, because the rights which the right to education for the people of Bangladesh enshrined in the Constitution of Bangladesh is not judicially enforceable. So it actually guides the government to provide directions to ensure education to the people. But if the people of Bangladesh are deprived of right to education, they cannot go to the court and file a case against the government, because it's
2
being
minutes. 2
thank
minutes.
you. It's being a part of the fundamental principles of state policy of the Constitution. So there are some other laws, since I'm running short of time, some other laws which also, talk about right to education for the Rohingya people. Now, if I just quickly move on to the challenges of providing education to the Rohingya children. As you can see that around 4 lakh school-age Rohingya children are living in the Rohingya refugee camps in Bangladesh. However, only 12% of registered Rohingya children have access to primary education. In addition to some schools in the host communities, there are 6,000 learning centers that provide playtime and primary school lessons to the Rohingya refugee children. Most recently, in 2020, Bangladesh government has taken an initiative to provide education to the Rohingya refugee children. But the problem is that curriculum should be approved by the Myanmar government. So it's being delayed. And COVID-19 has actually added challenges to implement the initiative which was taken by Bangladesh to ensure right to education to the children of the Rohingya refugees. There are some other challenges. For example, there are lack of resources, lack of permanent structures in the camps, inadequacy of training and payment to the teachers, low attendance of female students. It's a burning issue because most of the families, Rohingya families, they do not intend to send their female or their daughters to the schools or the centers because they want them to be confined within the house and just help their parents inside the house. They do not prefer that they go outside for learning. In addition to that, scarcity of study materials, difficulty to distribute study materials, lack of digital device and internet connections. These are the challenges or the problems that Rohingya refugee children are facing right now. And as I said, COVID-19 has actually added the problems. Now, quickly moving on to the conclusion and recommendations. As I said, the Rohingya children are being considered as lost generation right now because of different problems, including the right to education. So in my study, I've tried to highlight that there are some roles of the international community to ensure right to education to the Rohingya refugee children, including the UNHCR. Even the Bangladesh government has some obligations under the CRC, under CEDAW, although not under 1951 Refugee Convention. So Bangladesh government should also accelerate the process to provide education to the Rohingya refugee children, even following the Burmese curriculum as per the initiative of 2020. In addition to that, there should be more learning centers. And one unique point that I've tried to establish in my article is that the Rohingya youth should be empowered so that they can teach in their community. So if a group of Rohingya youth are being trained to let them know about some basics of human rights, education, and the primary education, then they will be able to teach their younger. So the Rohingya youth should be empowered if larger establishment is not possible for the Rohingya children's education. And the last recommendation that I've made in my article.
You've gone over time, so if
I'll just take 10 seconds if you allow.
Yeah.
Thank you. So the last recommendation that I've made is introducing mobile school in the camp. So there is no mobile schools in the camp. Mobile school means there would be a school, it should have all the curriculums and the materials like a school has, but it should move from one camp to another. There are 35 camps in the Cox's Bazar region right now. So that there should be some mobile schools so that the schools can move to the before the houses of the children, at least so that at least the children get education, especially the primary education. Thank you. I could have explained a little bit more, but since we have very limited time, so if you have any question, I would be able to explain more. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. We got a good flavor, I think, and I'm sure we can read further. So there's a question here. What are the ways to empower the Rohingya youth?
All right, I can give you some examples. Since I've been working as, in addition to my academic career, I'm working as volunteer with some organizations which are working on the Rohingya issue. One of the examples would be the NGOs are trying to provide training to the Rohingya youth to make them as facilitators. So the initiatives are coming from the non-government organizations more than the government or the international organizations. So they can pick some, Rohingya youth. They can provide them training for 3 months or 6 months, depending on their, resources. And when the Rohingya youth will be able to work as facilitators, they can monitor as to how they can work as facilitators in their community to teach the basic things to the youngers. So I think this could be one of the reasons as to providing training to the youngers, to the youth, and then monitoring their activities to see how the trainings were impactful. So this could be one of the ways, I would say.
So there's another question from Ahmed Bashir, which says, does the Rohingya people have official refugee status so that they can enjoy the facilities of being refugees? And if I can add to that, I mean, you described a kind of, panoply of laws, but what are the means of enforcing any of that? Who's going to do that and how?
Yeah, thank you. In case of Bangladesh, since Bangladesh is not a party to the 1951 Refugee Convention, so the Rohingya refugees are not enjoying the status of refugees in Bangladesh, because Bangladesh is, as I said, is not a party to the 1951 Refugee Convention. So therefore, I had to think about how CRC, how CEDAW can be applied for Bangladesh, because Bangladesh is a party to CRC, CEDAW, and CEDAW. So since CRC and CEDAW, they have created some obligations for right to education for the children, for the people, Bangladesh can be made bound to follow the provisions incorporated in the CRC and the CEDAW. But right now, I cannot say that 1951 convention can make bind Bangladesh, and due to the restrictions that I've just referred. Now, who will enforce these mechanisms? I think it should be the international community first, because I have tried to explore as to how international community play a role to provide education to the Rohingya people, and their role could be to make the the UNHCR and Bangladesh to follow the guidelines, and it includes the United Nations as well, because if we talk about CRC, CEDAW, which are being signed by Bangladesh, and the 1951 Convention, which is followed by UNHCR, then they are the enforcement bodies who should enforce the obligations to provide education to the Rohingya refugee children. I believe I've answered to the question.
Yeah, thank you. And there are two more questions, and I think after that we may have to bring this to a close. So the first question from the administrator, I'm not sure who that is. Why should Bangladesh consider the approval of curriculum from, can you hear that? You seem to have frozen. Are you still there? I wonder whether something happened to...
It might be a connection issue. Yeah.
Or another power cut. He seems to have completely frozen. Are you back now? Can you hear us again?
Yeah, I'm sorry. There was an unfortunate power cut in my place. I'm using actually hotspot, so probably these are creating the troubles. Yeah. Okay. Did you listen to my answer that I just provided?
Yes, we definitely had the answer to that one. But there are two more questions. So why should Bangladesh consider the approval of curriculum from the Myanmar government, education for competency? And sorry, and if you want to take the other one as well, what should be the medium of instruction for the Rohingya refugee children, and why? So I think those are connected questions.
Right, those are connected questions. And there was a debate in relation to the curriculum as to why should Bangladesh government follow the Burmese curriculum. And at the same time, what should be the medium? So these are the questions actually delayed the entire process of Bangladesh to take the initiative which was taken in 2020, although it's yet to be implemented. Because the particular reason is that Bangladesh is not willing to host the Rohingya community forever. So there is a hope that the Rohingya people will be repatriated to Rakhine State, which is their homeland. So if the Rohingya refugee children do not get education based on Burmese curriculum, then they won't be able to cope up in Myanmar if they get repatriated. So it actually follows the long-term process as to after the repatriation, the Rohingya children, they should be able to get a job in Myanmar, because if they follow the curriculum of Bangladesh, and if Bangladesh government does not comply with the curriculum provided by the Burmese government or the Burmese curriculum, then it would somehow signify that Bangladesh will host the Rohingya people forever. And Bangladesh government will be somehow bound to provide them employment because they will be educated in Bangladesh following the Bangladeshi curriculum. So the curriculum is, the focus is that the curriculum should be Burmese curriculum, and the language should be Burmese language. That's another challenge because there are very few teachers who can speak in the Burmese language. There are some teachers and some, especially some Islamic teachers who used to teach in Rakhine State. They are now living in the Rohingya refugee camps, but the number is very few. So it will be another challenge if the Burmese curriculum is being followed. Then the teacher would have to be provided with separate training to provide education to the Rohingya refugee children. So these are the challenges and questions are still going on. And in addition to the COVID-19, these questions are also delaying the entire process to implement the 2020 initiative of the Bangladesh government. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've gone over 10 minutes, so I'm afraid we can't carry on this very interesting discussion. There are a couple of comments that are to do with the Rohingya refugee status, not directly related to your paper, that you might like to see for yourself. But I would like to thank everyone for a really very fascinating session, which addresses the key question of the conference about rethinking education and raises critical issues about the limitations of some issues with education, notably digital modes of education, and also limitations of the law in ensuring access to education. So thanks very much indeed to all of you. And I wish you a rest of the conference. I wish the rest of the conference would go very well indeed as well to all of us.
Thank you so much, Professor Gooptu, for chairing this session so brilliantly. Thank you so much for sparing your time for this. And thank you to all the panelists for such wonderfully insightful presentations. These were such crucial issues to highlight in terms of education and access. And I'm so glad that we could hear from you, and just thank you so much for conducting this very crucial research. To all of you who are here, thank you for attending. We're going to take a small lunch break now. Well, it's a 1 hour long lunch break now. And after this, we will be back in room A. We're currently in room B, but our next roundtable at 2 p.m. UK time will be starting in room A. This roundtable is the Rethinking Policy and Education Roundtable. So I hope that you'll all be back after lunch. We'll be starting on time at 2. I'm sorry this has run over a little bit, but I think it was worth it. The discussions were so interesting and just really insightful. So I'd like to thank all of you for being here, and see you all at 2 p.m. in room A for the next roundtable. Thank you so much. We have 2 paper presentations lined up even after the roundtable. So I hope we'll see you there as well. The room B will open again at 3:45 for the next paper presentation on inequalities and the state again. In the meantime, during the break, if you'd like, we're going to put up some links here. So please do feel free to watch our recorded presentations on our YouTube channel. We have a lot of additional presentations by researchers, practitioners from around the world who've talked about their innovative solutions to education issues in their regions. So please feel free to do that. But thank you again, and see you soon at 2 p.m.